Last month, a 67-year-old woman named Dorothy sat across from me in my office and described something that millions of people experience every single night and almost nobody takes seriously enough. She said, "Doctor, every night without fail, my eyes open at 3 in the morning, not 2:30, not 3:30, 3 o'clock. Like a switch being flipped, my heart is racing, my mind is running, and I lie there for 2 hours staring at the ceiling until I finally give up and get out of bed." She had been doing this for 11 months. She told me she assumed it was just aging, that this was simply what sleep looked like after 67 years, that her body had decided at some point that full nights of uninterrupted sleep were no longer part of the arrangement. Dorothy was wrong, and the assumption she was making, the same assumption that most people make, was costing her in ways she could not yet fully measure. Because consistent, predictable awakening at 3 in the morning is not a personality quirk of the aging body. It is not a harmless inconvenience. It is, in almost every case, a biological event with a specific, identifiable cause, and in some cases it is a medical warning that carries real and significant cardiovascular consequences if it goes unaddressed. A 2023 study in sleep medicine found that 67% of people with sleep maintenance insomnia woke within a 2-hour window every single night, most commonly between 2 and 4 in the morning. The predictive factors were elevated evening cortisol, anxiety history, and disrupted circadian markers. Yahoo! This is not random. This is patterned, and patterns in biology are not coincidences. Today we are going through 8 specific biological reasons why the body wakes at 3 in the morning. What is happening inside the body during that moment? Why that specific time window is biologically significant? And how to distinguish the harmless from the genuinely dangerous. This is what your body is trying to tell you at 3 a.m. The first reason is one of the most misunderstood events in human sleep biology. The cortisol awakening response and the specific way it misfires in people over 50 who are carrying chronic stress. Cortisol is the body's primary alertness and stress hormone. It follows a precise 24-hour cycle, falling to its lowest point during the early hours of sleep, then beginning a programmed, gradual rise in the hours before dawn to prepare the body for the demands of waking life. This rise is not triggered by an alarm clock. It is triggered by the body's internal circadian clock, and it begins, in most people, somewhere between 2 and 4 in the morning. Under normal conditions in a body that is not carrying a chronic stress load, this cortisol rise is gradual and smooth. It remains below the threshold that would trigger full wakefulness until the appropriate hour. The person sleeps through it. But in a body that has been operating under sustained stress, and after 50, the proportion of people carrying that load increases substantially. The cortisol system behaves differently. Modern life puts constant pressure on this system. Chronic work stress, late evening screens, irregular meals, and accumulated poor sleep all push it toward a state where it never fully switches off. The body stays on low-level alert even while in bed. ABC News. When this chronically activated stress system encounters the natural 3 a.m. cortisol rise, the rise does not stay gradual. It spikes. The threshold for wakefulness is crossed, and the person wakes with the specific constellation of symptoms that Dorothy described: racing heart, racing mind, and the immediate fully alert quality of the awakening that makes returning to sleep feel impossible. Waking at 3 a.m. commonly reflects lighter late-night sleep cycles and a normal cortisol rise, made significantly worse by chronic stress, anxiety history, blood sugar dips, sleep apnea, depression, and hormonal changes. The Jerusalem Post. The cortisol awakening is real. The question is whether the body's stress reservoir is full enough that the natural 3 a.m. rise becomes a 3 a.m. alarm. The second reason involves the architecture of sleep itself and the specific biological vulnerability that the 3 a.m. window creates. Sleep does not occur as a single continuous state. It progresses through cycles, each lasting approximately 90 to 110 minutes, that move through distinct stages: light sleep, deep slow-wave sleep, REM sleep, the stage characterized by rapid eye movement, dream activity, and brain activity that approaches waking levels. In the early part of the night, the first 4 to 5 hours, the body prioritizes deep, slow-wave sleep. This is the most physiologically restorative phase. Growth hormone is released, cellular repair occurs, memory consolidation begins. By 3 in the morning, for most people who went to bed between 10 and 11, the need for deep sleep has been largely satisfied. The sleep architecture shifts, the proportion of REM sleep in each cycle increases, and REM sleep is, from a neurological standpoint, the most fragile and easily disrupted state the sleeping brain enters. By 3 a.m., most people are in a lighter stage of sleep or transitioning between cycles that makes them significantly more vulnerable to waking. If something nudges the system, stress, noise, temperature change, bladder pressure, blood sugar shifts, the person may wake fully instead of drifting back down. 1945. The 3 a.m. window is not arbitrary. It is the point in the night where the sleep architecture is at its most vulnerable, where the threshold between sleeping and waking is at its lowest, and where any of the biological disturbances we are discussing today are most likely to push a person across that threshold into full wakefulness. As we age, this vulnerability increases. Research indicates that adults over 60 spend significantly more time in lighter sleep stages compared to younger adults. The architecture becomes more fragile, the threshold for disturbance decreases, and the 3 a.m. window becomes correspondingly more dangerous. The third reason is one of the most commonly missed metabolic explanations for nighttime awakening, and one that is directly relevant to anyone managing blood sugar: nocturnal blood sugar instability. The body does not sit idle overnight. Starting around midnight, it begins releasing a wave of hormones that gradually push blood sugar upward. Growth hormone rises first, peaking between midnight and 4 a.m. Then, around 3:30 a.m., cortisol and adrenaline join in. These hormones signal the liver to produce more glucose and make the cells less responsive to insulin, a combination that can send blood sugar climbing well before the alarm goes off. But there is also the opposite scenario, and it is equally disruptive. A person who ate dinner at 6 p.m. and went to bed at 10 is 9 hours without food by 3 a.m., enough time for blood sugar to drop significantly. When the brain senses low blood sugar, it releases cortisol to jumpstart metabolism, and that cortisol release wakes the person up. Military times. Studies on nighttime glucose metabolism have found that people with blood sugar issues wake up more often. After a carbohydrate-heavy meal late at night, reactive hypoglycemia can develop several hours later, right around 3 a.m. Insulin resistance makes this worse. The body cannot regulate glucose properly, producing wide swings throughout the night. Yahoo! The symptoms of a nocturnal blood sugar crash are specific and recognizable in retrospect, even if they are not recognized in the moment: waking with a pounding or racing heart, a sensation of shakiness or internal trembling, sweating without external heat, a feeling of hunger that arrives simultaneously with the awakening, a sense of anxiety that has no apparent psychological cause, because its cause is not psychological at all, it is biochemical. For someone managing diabetes or prediabetes, the 3 a.m. awakening is frequently the most consistent and reliable external indicator of nocturnal glucose instability, and it is almost universally attributed to stress, to anxiety, or to simply not sleeping well, rather than to the metabolic event that is actually producing it. The fourth reason is the one that cannot be ignored, the one that carries the most serious cardiovascular consequences, the one that is present in an estimated 39 million American adults, most of whom do not know it: obstructive sleep apnea. Obstructive sleep apnea affects an estimated 39 million American adults, many of them undiagnosed. Breathing pauses throughout the night create arousal responses. Some individuals wake gasping, others experience brief arousals they do not consciously remember. Since REM periods predominate in early morning hours, apnea events cluster between 2 and 6 a.m. The gateway pundit here is the mechanism that makes this clinically significant beyond the disruption to sleep. When the airway collapses during sleep, breathing stops, oxygen levels in the blood fall. The brain, detecting the oxygen deprivation, activates the sympathetic nervous system. The fight or flight response to force a resumption of breathing. Heart rate increases, blood pressure rises, cortisol surges, even if breathing resumes. Without conscious awakening, these physiological changes fragment sleep and can cause awareness. The gateway pundit. In severe cases, oxygen saturation can fall below 80% during these events. The sympathetic activation required to restore breathing produces a cardiovascular jolt that is, in the words of one cardiologist, comparable to a small adrenaline injection delivered directly to the heart, repeated dozens of times per night, every night. The consequences are documented. Obstructive sleep apnea is independently associated with elevated blood pressure, cardiac arrhythmia, increased risk of heart attack and stroke, accelerated progression of insulin resistance, and impaired cognitive function. These consequences accumulate not only during the nights when apnea events are occurring, but over months and years of undiagnosed, untreated, repeated cardiovascular stress. The 3 a.m. awakening associated with sleep apnea has a specific character that distinguishes it from other causes. The person wakes suddenly, not gradually. They may wake gasping, or with a very dry mouth, or with the sensation of having just been startled. The heart is pounding, there may be a headache upon waking, and during the day. Regardless of how many hours were spent in bed, the person feels unrested, fatigued, cognitively slow. A home sleep apnea test can reveal the number of apnea events occurring per hour during sleep. In documented cases, individuals with 34 apnea events per hour during REM sleep reported consistent 3 a.m. awakenings which resolved entirely within 3 weeks of appropriate treatment. Pravdinato if this description matches. What is happening? The sudden awakening, the dry mouth, the gasping, the daytime fatigue that sleep does not relieve. This is the reason on this list that warrants the most urgent clinical attention. The fifth reason affects women disproportionately and is consistently attributed to the wrong cause: hormonal temperature dysregulation. The body's core temperature follows a precise circadian rhythm. It peaks in the late afternoon and early evening and falls progressively through the night, reaching its lowest point in the hours around 3 to 5 a.m. This temperature drop is not incidental. It is physiologically linked to the maintenance of deep sleep. The falling core temperature is one of the signals the brain uses to sustain and deepen the sleep state. In women over 50, the hormonal changes of menopause and postmenopause alter the body's ability to regulate this temperature cycle. Declining estrogen levels narrow what physiologists call the thermoneutral zone, the range of internal temperatures within which the body maintains thermal comfort without triggering regulatory responses. Within this narrowed zone, small, normal fluctuations in core temperature that a younger body would manage without awareness become sufficient to trigger a thermoregulatory response. The body attempts to release heat, blood vessels in the skin dilate, sweat glands activate, and the person wakes often with a sensation of intense heat, flushing, and sweating in what is commonly called a night sweat or hot flash. The 3 a.m. timing is not coincidental. It is the hour at which the core temperature is supposed to be at its lowest, and in a body with compromised thermoregulatory precision, the transition to that lowest point becomes a trigger rather than a facilitator of sleep. The cardiovascular consequence of repeated nighttime temperature dysregulation is not trivial. The vasodilation and sweating of a hot flash represent a real physiological event, one that elevates heart rate, shifts fluid balance, and activates the autonomic nervous system in a woman with underlying cardiovascular risk factors. This repeated 3 a.m. autonomic activation is not a harmless inconvenience. The sixth reason is one that many people actively create in the genuine belief that it is helping them sleep: alcohol. The relationship between alcohol and sleep is one of the most consistently misunderstood in medicine. Alcohol is sedating. It reduces the time required to fall asleep. It suppresses anxiety and the ruminative thinking that often prevents sleep onset, and so it has been used as a sleep aid formally and informally for centuries. What happens inside the body after those first hours of sedation is the part that most people are never told. Alcohol is metabolized by the liver at a relatively consistent rate, approximately 1 standard drink per hour. As the alcohol is metabolized, a byproduct called acetaldehyde accumulates before it is further metabolized. Acetaldehyde is a disruptive compound. As acetaldehyde accumulates during alcohol breakdown, it causes awakening. The timing correlates precisely with common 3 a.m. wake times for evening drinkers, the Gateway Pundit. Simultaneously, alcohol suppresses REM sleep in the early part of the night. As the sedating effect wears off, the brain attempts to recover the REM sleep it was suppressed from having. This REM rebound produces an intense, fragmented period of dream sleep in the second half of the night, exactly when the 3 a.m. window occurs. That is lighter, more easily disrupted, and more likely to produce full awakening than normal REM sleep. Blood sugar instability compounds alcohol's effects substantially. Alcohol inhibits gluconeogenesis, the liver's glucose production mechanism, which can cause nocturnal hypoglycemia several hours after drinking, triggering the awakening cascade. Dehydration contributes separately. Alcohol acts as a diuretic, increasing urine production. Full bladder signals may initiate awakening, while dehydration triggers stress responses that prevent return to sleep, the Gateway Pundit. The alcohol that was consumed to help sleep is through multiple simultaneous mechanisms producing the 3 a.m. awakening that makes sleep feel insufficient. The seventh reason is one of the most commonly overlooked physiological causes of nighttime awakening and one of the most correctable: acid reflux, also called gastroesophageal reflux disease or GERD. During the day, the upright position and the regular act of swallowing help move stomach acid back down when it refluxes into the esophagus. During sleep, the body is horizontal. Swallowing is infrequent, and the lower esophageal sphincter, the muscular valve that prevents stomach contents from moving upward, is at its most relaxed. The 3 a.m. window represents the point in the sleep cycle when stomach acid production, which follows its own circadian pattern, is near its peak. combined with the horizontal position and the muscular relaxation of deep sleep, acid is most likely to move upward into the esophagus during these hours. The awakening produced by nighttime reflux is not always the dramatic burning sensation of daytime heartburn. It may present as a sudden awakening with a sensation of pressure or discomfort in the chest, a bitter or acidic taste in the mouth, a cough, a sensation of something in the throat, or simply an abrupt awakening with no identifiable sensation because the acid contact with the esophageal lining has triggered a vagal nerve reflex that produces arousal without pain. In someone over 60 who is more likely to have reduced esophageal motility, reduced lower esophageal sphincter tone, and higher rates of hiatal hernia than a younger person, nighttime reflux is both more common and more likely to produce 3 a.m. awakenings that are attributed to anxiety, to insomnia, or to simply being an older adult with sleep problems. The eighth reason connects the 3 a.m. awakening to the cardiovascular system in a way that most people never consider: the heart itself and the specific way in which certain cardiac conditions produce nighttime symptoms. The most well-documented cardiac cause of 3 a.m. awakening is paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea, condition associated with heart failure in which fluid that has accumulated in the legs and lower extremities during the day redistributes into the circulation when the person lies down. Over the first few hours of sleep, this redistributed fluid increases the volume of blood returning to the heart. The left ventricle in a heart with reduced function cannot adequately handle this increased volume. Pressure backs up into the pulmonary circulation. Fluid begins to accumulate in the lung tissue. The person wakes typically 1 to 3 hours after going to sleep, or in the 3 a.m. window if they went to bed in the evening with a sensation of breathlessness. They need to sit up or stand or go to an open window. The breathlessness improves within minutes of assuming an upright position as the fluid redistributes downward. Under gravity. This specific pattern, awakening with breathlessness that resolves with sitting up, occurring predictably in the early morning hours, particularly in someone with known or suspected heart disease, is a clinical finding that warrants same-week evaluation. Additionally, cardiac arrhythmias, including atrial fibrillation, frequently have a nocturnal pattern. The sympathetic nervous system activation produced by sleep apnea events directly increases the risk of cardiac arrhythmia, with heart rate increasing, blood pressure rising, and cortisol surging with each event. In someone who wakes at 3 a.m. with a pounding or irregular heartbeat, particularly if accompanied by dizziness, chest discomfort, or a sense that the heart is beating unusually, this is a symptom that belongs in a clinical conversation, not in a personal list of aging inconveniences. The Gateway Pundit. 8 reasons, 8 biological mechanisms, all of them converging on the same window of the night: the cortisol system that fires too sharply at 3 a.m. in a body carrying chronic stress, the fragile sleep architecture of the early morning hours that makes the body easily displaced from sleep, the nocturnal blood sugar crash that produces adrenaline, racing heart, and sweating at the exact hour when glucose regulation is most vulnerable. The obstructive sleep apnea events that cluster in REM sleep, delivering repeated cardiovascular jolts to a heart that has no idea it is being stressed. The hormonal temperature dysregulation that turns the body's lowest temperature point into a triggering event rather than a deepening of sleep. The alcohol metabolite and REM rebound that conspire to make a nightcap into a 3 a.m. alarm. The acid reflux that moves silently upward in a horizontal, sleeping body and produces arousal through pathways that do not always announce themselves as heartburn, and the cardiac conditions heart failure, arrhythmia that produce their own specific patterns of nighttime awakening that most people spend years attributing to stress. Dorothy's 3 a.m. awakening had a cause, it had a mechanism, and it had a solution once the mechanism was identified. The 3 a.m. awakening is not the price of getting older. It is a message from specific biological systems, using a specific and consistent time stamp. The question is not whether the message is being sent. The question is whether anyone is listening. If this information reached you at the right moment, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more evidence-based health information, clearly and honestly explained. Stay informed, stay aware. We will see you in the next one.